just to say that we also see God walking along with Gideon in a sense to convince Gideon, to comfort Gideon. He gives Gideon enough information that it gives Gideon courage and the right mindset to do what Gideon needs to do. And so God's not up there, mad and frustrated and angry with Gideon. He gives Gideon what he needs as far as courage and the mindset that he needs. He comforts Gideon. And so we see a timid, somewhat hesitant Gideon. At first, he wants signs. He lays the fleece out, and he wants a sign, and he wants to be convinced. And I don't think anything's wrong with that, is my point. He wants a sign. All right, God obliges. God gives him a sign. And then when we get into this chapter, chapter 7, God is going to whittle the Egyptian army down from thousands to just 300. And if we go to, I can't remember can't remember the verse. How many? Verse 6? No, there's a verse in chapter 8 that mentions how many soldiers were in the... I don't think that's it. No, there's a verse in chapter 8 that mentions how many men were in the Midianite army. 8:10. There you go. And their armies with them, about 15,000. All were left of all the army of the people of the east, for 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. So we have 100,000+ men, at least in the Midianite army. And God's going to take Israel's army and narrow it down to 300 men. And so if you're Gideon, the numbers are not adding up, and in your mind, as a human being, you want some clarification from God, basically, and that's what God gives him. God will give him that, and we'll see how he does it. So let's get into the text. You have an outline if you grabbed it on the way in, Judges chapter 7, and we'll notice some really cool stuff here with Gideon and the Israelite army. So Gideon appears about 40 years after Deborah. So this is 40 years after Deborah and Barak in Judges chapter 5 and verse 31. The main characters, we have more, but the main characters mentioned at least by name. We have the Midianites. They oppressed Israel for 7 years. This would have been the people, the tribe, the nation that Moses married into from the tribe of Midian, or from the people of Midian. And then we have Gideon, the character, the fifth judge of Israel. Here he also goes by another name as we get into chapter 7, verse 1. He is called Jerubbaal. And that's because in chapter 6 he tears down the idols of Baal that belonged to his father, or at least the people, but it's mentioned there that his father, and he tears down the idols, and so his name is changed to Jerubbaal, or I don't know if it's changed, but given a second name, Jerubbaal. And it's interesting that the people of the village, when they saw the idols were torn down, and they realized it was Gideon, and they wanted to kill Gideon, and it was Gideon's father who I don't know if Gideon's father was really standing up to him. He might have been in a way, but he was also making a good point that, these were idols that were erected to Baal, and if Baal is a god, let Baal defend himself. Don't come kill Gideon. Let Baal defend himself. And that's what the name Jerubbaal means, really, that if Baal, let Baal defend himself. Let Baal contend for the actions of Gideon. And we know that Baal is not a real god. Nothing happened. But there's the meaning of the name change. All right, chapter 7 and verse 1. Let's go through this. So the first section on your outline, God reduces Gideon's army, verses 1 through 8. Verse 1, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them. So they have camped on the south side of the Midianites to the north, by the hill of Morah, in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. So basically, what God is saying is that Israel's army currently, all of the able men to fight, there's too many that if Israel, the way they are right now with the thousands of soldiers, if they go up against Midian and they fight, there's enough Israelite soldiers for Israel to think that they defeated Midian and to give themselves the glory. So what God is saying is, I'm going to whittle that number down to the point that the only option Israel has is to give God the glory. Because there's no way that once they get to 300 men, that 300 men can realistically go and defeat 35,000 at least in the Midianite army. 300, 100, and let's say 50. Good, even, solid number. 150,000. There's no way. Realistically. Even in modern day today, with all the technology that we have, 300 versus 135 or so thousand. Just no way. The only way that Israel, on the other end of the victory, is to say, well, we did this by the glory of God, the help of God. That's the only way. So that's what God is saying, is that right now there's too many, and if Israel were to prevail against the Midianites, they will not give me the glory. They will not realize that I am their helper. They will give themselves the glory, and so we're going to change the numbers here. Verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So based on that number, we have 32,000. And so that's a lot. I mean, compared to 300, that's a lot. I don't know if it compares to Midianite's army, but it's enough that God says 32,000 versus 135,000 or so. It's just enough that if you prevail, you're going to give yourself the glory and not me. And so I'm going to make it 300. Now, the first option that God gives to Gideon is to just proclaim to all the men that if you are afraid, if you are fearful to fight, which I'm sure every single soldier to some degree is. I don't know how you can really get rid of and eradicate every ounce of fear in a fight. How do you just not be afraid? Now, you can overcome it. So the first option that God says to Gideon, to all the people, is whoever is fearful and afraid. Right now is your opportunity to turn around and go back home. 2,000 turned around and left. And he's left with 10,000. And God's going to say, well, that's still a lot. I'm sure God could have used 10,000, and Israel might have it might have given God the glory, 10,000 versus the Midianites. But still, 10,300, 300 is still a much better story for God to use. Now, they're not going to fight. So here's the thing. So God's not going to use 300 men to go into the Midianite army and 300 men just destroy the whole army by the edge of the sword. There's going to be more of a psychological warfare. There's going to be more trickery involved, and it's brilliant, really. So God narrows it down to 300, and then they're going to strategically surround the Midianites and do some things, and we'll talk about it, that will ultimately cause Midian to turn on itself. And so we'll get there. All right, verse 4. So after 22,000 turned and went home, but the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Perhaps, let's consider this as well. God knew the strategy and what he would do with Gideon and the men to surround the army of Midian. God perhaps knew that situation. Perhaps 10,000 was too many to organize that. And so maybe it's not now to the point where Israel wouldn't give me the glory. Maybe now it's just not realistic in getting 10,000 men in place to do so. God, again, he's like, it's still too many. Bring them down to the water. Now, there is a spring. If you go over to this part of the world, if you go to this ancient, what we would call Bible lands, today there is a spring where if you were to go there and to tour, there is a location, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, but there is a location where if you take a guided tour, there's so much to see over there. So you would just have to go and, there is a location, a spring of water that today people believe to be the water that Gideon and his army, it's in that area. The Bible tells us, geographically, some places, the valley and the mountains and where they are. And so we can narrow it down, but there is a spring of water over in that part of the world where you can go, and it is believed to be the water that Gideon took his army and they drank from. And so you can go see that. Now, is it really the place? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if we can know with 100% certainty. But he takes the 10,000 men down to the water, and God said, I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So God's going to give them a test. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, whoever gets down on his knees to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink the water. So there's a little bit that we need to distinguish here, because it sounds like something that might be a little bit confusing to us if we don't read it carefully, because it describes lapping water like a dog. So we might think, if we're not careful, that that's the one who got on his knees and put his face down into the water. That's how a dog would drink. The dog puts his face down into the water and laps it up. But that's not the person that's being described here. The person who laps water like a dog is the person who cupped it in its hand and brought it up to its mouth. Now, the Hebrew word here, and I don't know a whole lot other than to tell you that the Hebrew word here mimics the sound that a dog would make when lapping water. That you've had a dog, Christian and I have a dog, we can be in another room, and we can hear Ginger in there All right, the sound that the dog makes lapping the water with its tongue. Well, that's the sound that the men would have made when they cupped the water and they bring it up to their mouth. They would have made a sound like a dog lapping water, compared to the man who got on his knees and stuck his face into the water and drank that way. There's not really a sound there. But when you bring it up this way and drink it, there's some slurping, perhaps, or the sound of a dog drinking. And so don't think that the person who got on his knees is the one like a dog drinking water. It's actually the opposite. It's a little bit confusing. And so let's read it again. Verse 5, so he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set him apart by himself. Those are the ones that we're going to save. Likewise, everyone, so the opposite, gets down on his knees to drink. So they either drink it like a dog, bringing it up, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, like why. And the numbers of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got on their knees to drink water. Now, what's the difference here? What's the difference? Now, we can speculate. We don't really know. But there is a pretty common interpretation here. Why? What's the difference between the way they drank? What's the test? What'd you say? Vigilance, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. That is what we commonly think is the test here, that as a soldier, which we're not, we don't live that lifestyle. We don't know. I mean, back in that day, if you're a soldier, you need to be prepared at all times. You need to be vigilant. You need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be watchful. Yeah, and the Bible uses that type of language, to compare the Christian, in our spiritual battle, that, we need to be diligent and vigilant, and we need to be aware of our spiritual surroundings. We need to be watchful, right? We don't let your guard down. And so it seems, again, we're not told exactly, but it seems to be the man who just comes up to the water and gets down on his hands and knees and sticks his face into the water, that kind of man is not vigilant. He's not as watchful of what's happening around him. He's the kind of man, soldier, that someone could sneak up on and attack because he's not watching. The other men who scoop the water like this and bring it up, right? You're watching your surroundings. So it seems to be that's the test here. And so God says the men who did not get on his hands and knees, the men who did not, and they cupped it and brought it to their mouth and licked it like a dog, the Hebrew writer, I guess, would describe it as that sound. Those are your men. Those are your men. And there were 300 of them. And so those are the rest went home. Could you imagine if you were part of the ones who got down and drank water, and all of a sudden Gideon said, all right, go home. And you're like, what did I do? All I did was drink water. Anyway, so pretty interesting test. Let's see. And so the ones who drank water the way like a dog brought it with 300. Then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. Send them home. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, And he sent them away to the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So the Midian was north, so this is not meaning south. They were just down in the valley below him. Now, something I want to talk about here for just a second and make a comparison. When you read the language here, God has already given Gideon the victory. He's already given him the victory. And Gideon hasn't even fought the battle yet. But when you read it, and this is one out of many examples where God, the way that God talks, he's already given the victory. I mean, read it. God said to Gideon, verse 7, "Then by 300 men who lapped water, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go into the place." So the people took provisions, right? So God is saying that I'm going to save you by 300 men. But when you read it, God is saying, like, I've already given you the victory if you will trust me. The same idea is presented to us in the New Testament, that the victory is ours. Faith is the victory, right? Jesus has already won. Jesus has already defeated the devil. And so there is not this let's get to the end of the world scenario and see who wins, Jesus or Satan. Jesus already won at the cross. If we go back to Genesis chapter 3 and the prophecy that God gives to Adam and Eve there, that Jesus will deliver a crushing blow to Satan, crush his head, and all it will do is bruise the heel of Jesus, right? Jesus defeated the devil. And so faith is the victory. Ours is the victory. And so we are fighting a war, yes, but we've already won. And so compare that to some of these Old Testament scenarios and battles where God says to Gideon, I've already given you the victory. You just got to trust me. And so to us today, the same is true. We've already won, or at least Jesus has already won. And so don't live your life and fight spiritually every day like Satan may one day win. He won't. He doesn't. He hasn't. He's lost. He's still out there. He still exists. He's still throwing out snares and temptations. But in the New Testament, the good news is that Jesus wins. And ours is the victory. I mean, we sing songs like faith is the victory. And live your life like that as a Christian, knowing that Jesus won. And you and I win because of Jesus. And so God just tells Gideon, he's like, I've given you the victory. Just trust me. Now, Gideon needs a little bit more reassurance because he's got 300 men. And so again, as a human, you have to look at numbers. And you're like, God, are you sure about this? You sure? You sure? All right. Let's get into the second section. So that is God reduces Gideon's army. Beginning in verse 9 through 15, God reassures Gideon with the Midianites' dream. So perhaps God can still tell that Gideon is a little bit reluctant. And Gideon doesn't need to be that way. Gideon, you need to be sure. You need to be courageous. If there's any ounce of fear within you that is going to hinder you in your actions, what can I do before you face the Midianites? And so God in verse 9 is going to help Gideon. Verse 9, and it happened the same night that the Lord said to him, Rise, go down to the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down, go down to the camp with Porah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. And so God gives Gideon this option. Listen, Gideon, if you're afraid, go down to the camp. And I want you to go down with Porah, and I want you to go down. I want you to listen to something. If you're afraid, And so Gideon does. He goes down to the camp, which tells us what? He was probably afraid. God said, if you're afraid, go listen to something. Gideon could have said, no, God, I'm good. I trust you. I'm not afraid. Let's do this. But God says, Gideon, if you're afraid. And Gideon goes down, which to me, as I read this and study, seems to say, yeah, Gideon needed a little bit more reassurance. And so God says, all right, here's your opportunity. Go down to the camp. I want you to listen to something. And you shall hear what they say, and afterwards your hands shall be strengthened to go against the camp. Then they went down with Purah. He went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. And so he went to the outer part of the camp in secret. It's at night. He's hidden by cover of darkness. He goes down to what would be like a security post, like a watch post, where there's soldiers who are watching while others are resting and perhaps not on guard. So this is a watch post. And there's soldiers in the watch post of the tribe of Midian. And they have this conversation that Gideon overhears about a dream that one of the soldiers had. And there's no doubt in my mind that God allowed, or rather gave the dream to the soldier so that he could speak it to his co-soldier, so that Gideon could hear the dream and be strengthened and have confidence because of it. Verse 12, now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number. Wait. Yep, I'm right. Were without number as the sands of the seashore. And Gideon had come there with a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, so Gideon is there somewhere within earshot, listening. And one of the soldiers says, I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it down so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Now, in that day, barley was associated with poor people. Barley was a cheaper grain. It was a cheaper option. And so this could represent the oppressed Israel, that they were oppressed by. Obviously, they weren't thriving. They weren't flourishing as a nation. They were poor and oppressed because of the Midianites. So here's the dream that the soldier says, that a barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and just crushed everything. And so then, perhaps by the interpretation of and help of God, God allows the other soldier to interpret the dream so that Gideon can hear that. So his companion said to him, verse 14, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. So let's pause. Think about Gideon. How would you feel if you were Gideon and you just heard the Midianite soldiers talking about this? Right? Would it give you a little boost of encouragement? Would it, in a good way, give you a bigger head with confidence that, they had a dream, and it all had to do with Israel and especially Gideon and his leadership, and that's what he needed to hear, that he was going to be the one, with the help of God and the 300 men, destroy Israel or the Midian. And so that's the dream, and that's the interpretation, and Gideon hears it. Verse 15, and it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshiped God, obviously. That he worshiped God. He feels compelled, obviously, to worship God because He's been strengthened here, I believe. He's been encouraged. He has confidence now. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hands." You hear a little bit of a different tone in the voice of Gideon now. Arise, God's given us the Midianite army. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. So you have 100 men, 100 men, and 100 men. And he put a trumpet in every man's hand. This would have been like a ram's horn, something that they would blow, and this is not a musical instrument. It just made one loud trumpet sound, like a trumpet of war. So every man, all 300, received a trumpet, a ram's horn, with empty pitchers. So they have clay pots, a horn, and a pot. I and all who are with me, oh wait, hold on, I missed something. And torches inside the pitchers, verse 16, that's the very last part. So they have a ram's horn, a pitcher, and torches. And he said to them, "Look at me, and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you shall blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon." So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. That would be midnight. They had different watches throughout the night. And from my understanding, the beginning of the second watch, the middle watch, would have been midnight. And I think it would go to 3 a.m. Just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hand. So simultaneously with the 300 Israelite army men, when Gideon blew on his trumpet, the rest blew on their trumpet, and they broke the pitchers, which would have all sounded together, and so you have this loud breaking noise. I'm sure that the Midianite army, when they heard the pitchers breaking, they didn't say, "Oh, those are pitchers breaking." I'm sure they just heard the noise of something breaking and crashing. They heard the ram's horns, verse 20. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hand and the trumpets in their right hand for blowing, and they cried. So all of a sudden, in one accord, you have the 300 men. I told you this was not going to be a battle, Gideon and 300 just coming in and wiping out with the sword all of Midian. It's a psychological warfare. It's a strategy to appear bigger and larger than they really are. So they're making all this racket and noise. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. I'm sure most of the Midianite army is asleep. They're waking up from asleep. It's dark. They didn't have electricity like we do now. And so all of a sudden, middle of the night, if they had torches throughout the camp, we don't know. If they had fires, whatever. But they're not going to wake up and then start a fire. So they have to rely on what they already have. So they wake up in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden they have horns blowing. They see the torches around them. They hear pots breaking. And it sounds like Israel has a bigger army than they really do. And they're crying out, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." And every man stood in his place around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried and fled. So they're panicking. When the 300 men blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against the companion throughout the whole camp. So they attack each other. Verse 22, notice, when the 300 men blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. So the way that 300 men with Gideon destroys this large Midianite army is that the Midianite army starts killing itself because it's perhaps so dark and everything just happens so suddenly. They're panicking. They turn on each other. They don't know who's who. they don't know who's Israel, who's Midianites. They start fighting, killing each other. And so if you have an army that's fighting against itself and killing itself, you know, Gideon and his army's just doing its thing, and the Midianites are killing each other. And the army fled to Beth Achaia toward Zorah, as far as the border of Abel Mahala and Tabath, by Tabath, and the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh. So you have three tribes mentioned here, Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites that got away. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim. Now, when we get to chapter 8, Ephraim was not included with the tribes that pursued in the original fight. And so, the beginning of chapter 8, Ephraim is upset that they were not chosen to fight. But you have Gideon sending out messengers now because of the Midianites that have fled away into the territory, perhaps of Ephraim. Verse 24, then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places. If you control the watering places, the fresh water, you have the upper hand. And so go against and protect the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth Beor and Jordan. And they captured two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb by the rocks of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the wine presses of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. And so that's the conclusion of the battle here as they capture these Midian princes and they behead them. And I'm not sure how Gideon felt whenever, how do you know? I know he knows, well, okay, they were captured, but like they bring the heads of the two men to Gideon. They're like, we got them kind of thing. But, it's just one of those things where like we can't even picture that really without, the Bible again is just not PG at times. We've read some pretty graphic stuff in the book of Judges, and so they bring the heads of these two princes. Then we get into chapter 8. We're not going to get into it this morning. It's 9:45, so my time is up. We'll get into chapter 8. We'll notice a few more things that is said about Gideon. Gideon will die at the end of chapter 8. We'll read about his death, and then we will continue on to our sixth judge. And questions, comments, thoughts? All right. Appreciate your attention.